I used to work for a LIHTC apartment developer, and during that time, I prepared an application for LIHTC in Maryland. It was a twin deal. It was actually a triplet deal in the sense that there was a 9% and 4% mixed use project, and it was awarded both the 9 and the 4, as well as millions of subordinate state debt and county money. So that's interesting. Adam, feel free to introduce yourself.
Are you talking about Neville Street for that one?
No, so this is Amherst.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Stein. I'm the founder of Bridgewater Real Estate Brokerage. We're a multifamily investment sales and advisory brokerage, specialize in affordable housing and development. So typically, my clients are affordable housing investors, operators, and developers. And I go around making calls on property owners of old office buildings, old hotels, dirt, whatever, in an area where I know my clients will be not only competitive, but potentially by far the highest and best use. And with the goal of selling that real estate to an affordable housing developer. So I can talk a lot about as a broker, I learn a little bit about a lot, kind of a jack of all trades in the industry, and I'm happy to share about how I approach these transactions. And I was thinking I would just kind of comment on some of the things that Brian and Spencer talk about, but I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Spencer?
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. Spencer Vickers, I'm the founder of the Fractional Analyst. I have been in commercial real estate underwriting and acquisitions and asset management from an institutional and private wealth perspective over the last 6 years. And recently I started the Fractional Analyst to provide more on-demand services to different operators and sponsors around the country. And it's been a great ride. So primarily we provide financial models for commercial real estate. Right now we have a multifamily development model with a retail component and then a multifamily acquisitions model. That's on the product side. I just hired somebody to help me grow that side, so we'll be doing more of that. And then on the services side, we provide the on-demand services to different operators. So really glad to have Brian and Adam here today. They're experts in this affordable housing LIHTC space, and I'm super grateful to have them and to have Brian go over the basics of LIHTC and give us an example deal that he's going to walk through.
All right, so here's just a basic overview. So LIHTC is obviously low-income housing tax credits, and it's basically dollar for dollar tax credits that typically things like banks or other institutions, there's syndicators or large investors who basically have a large tax burden to invest in these tax credits in the form of providing equity to buy those credits, basically. So the way that this works is that the LIHTC is basically allocated by state housing agencies, and the easiest way to find the most information on this is really searching by your state and searching for the qualified allocation plan that shows you how to apply for the tax credits. There's a guide, what makes you competitive, and things of that nature. So qualifying for LIHTC, basically, there's a few different scenarios, or there's a few different approaches, and there may actually be another one. This is basically the distribution of your rents and income restriction requirements. So like 20/50 is at least 20% of the units have to be restricted to renters with incomes less than 50% of AMI, and 40/60 thereafter. And income averaged is newer, but basically this is that 40% of your units, basically a weighted average, need to be at 60% or less.
If anyone doesn't know, AMI is area median income.
Right. So the applicable fraction, this is basically how your total tax credits is calculated. It's part of a larger formula, but basically what this means is that sure, you have 100 of 150 total units, which are affordable, right? So you have 100 units divided by 150. But what if you put a bunch of small square footage units in those 100? Really, what the applicable fraction does is it tries to, or it captures like the minimum. So it's like, is your square footage or your total units, whatever's the minimum of your affordable versus market rate versus AKA total. That's how that's calculated. And that feeds into your larger calculation. So syndicating LIHTC, so project equity really is, so the LIHTC, the tax credits are delivered on an annual basis. However, like the total equity position, it's calculated similar to like these investors come in with like an IRR approach. You know, they want to hit certain hurdles or no certain return metrics. And it's really over a 10-year period. So you have 10 years of LIHTC allocation, tax credit allocation, and that's what's wrapped into their ultimate calculation of like, you know, similar to like a cash flow. So typically what's really interesting is that the investor, aka the ILP, will typically own the deal 99.99%, meaning they get all the tax credits, and the general partner, oftentimes like a nonprofit or for a profit or whoever wants to, you know, carry out the transaction, they own very little, aka they don't get that much of the tax credits. So two types of LIHTC, obviously the 9%. This is more valuable, but there's a cap. So basically in Maryland, this could change in other states, but I know that in Maryland, there's a $15 million cap on the total LIHTC for a 9% transaction. These are competitive. So, you know, you have to go through a long process, and the 4% is also competitive, but it's by right, but the bonds are competitive. So, you know, you have to go through an application process basically showing, okay, you have a qualified team, architects, you know, GCs, you know, engineers, the project's under your control. It makes sense from a financial perspective. You have equity, et cetera. And that's what's in your LIHTC application. So that covers the two types of LIHTC. The one thing that I would point out also is that on the 4%, both projects will have a construction loan, but the 4%, there's a 50% test, which basically you have to meet in the sense that your total tax exempt bonds, feel free to chime in here if you like, but your bonds have to represent 50% of your total project construction, like construction basis, which is like your qualified basis. I'll show that in the model in a minute.
And so, Brian, are you not held to that same test for the 9% LIHTC?
No, you're not. That's correct. You're not.
And you had mentioned that in Maryland specifically on the 9% LIHTC, there's a cap of $15 million. So if you have a $60 million project, you can only receive up to $15 million in LIHTC proceeds?
That's if you're doing a 9, correct. What you'll see shortly is that's interesting is that on a deal that I recently worked on, the cost of building the 9%, which was originally about 50 units, was not really being entirely captured by the 9% credit in the sense that it costed, I don't know, maybe far beyond that 15 plus whatever. Really meaning like the total cost of the 9% project was so far in excess of the total 9% credits that you could receive that it really made sense to move in terms of like a condo structure. That's what these are like typically set up, like the twin deals. It made sense to move the units in the condo structure to the 4% to actually capture that basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So these are just a few underwriting considerations. So HUD establishes rent and income limits annually. These are typically they're released in April. There's obviously rental subsidies. These can be in the form of like Section 811 units, or you know, any other type of subsidy that basically would capture the differential between fair market rents and your 30% AMI rents. And the types of sources for these projects are really, it's far more complicated than market rate. I always say this, but it's basically, there's must pay debt like any other deal. This is like your perm loan. There's the LIHTC, and then there's the cash flow contingent debt. So this is, Adam will probably talk on this in a minute, but on the market rate, even like not on the market rate, on the for-profit firms as well, you'll have that cash flow contingent debt, which is basically they get a split in terms of like a waterfall structure, which I'll show here shortly. That captures like the free cash flow, basically, or the cash flow after debt service. There's also deferred developer fee, but that is basically a number that's like whatever is the differential between your cash flow from operations minus your must pay debt minus your cash flow contingent, and then you get your deferred developer fee. That's like, what if your developer fee do you need to use in the capital stack or push back to a later date in order to make the deal work, really? So Adam, do you want to share any thoughts on like how the for-profit guys versus the nonprofits, how you've seen them do that, or like look at these deals?
Sure. Yeah. Generally, well, what you described is how both for-profit and nonprofit developers approach these types of projects. Like typically the goal and the beauty of one of these projects is that there's little to no money out of pocket for a developer of an affordable housing project, 100% affordable housing project, except for the pre-development funds. Now they can be in the range of $2 million or more, but the goal is there's really not much equity. Typically, the goal is to have absolutely none of your own money in these projects after closing. And the way to do that is you got to think about your capital stack, right? You have your debt, which is instead of going to 65% like a market rate deal, a loan to cost, these rents are restricted to generally 60% of AMI. So that portion of your capital stack for the debt is typically only around 35, 40, 45%. Then your low income housing tax credits is typically around another 35, 40, 45% of your capital stack. And that's the free money that you're allocated from the state from the federal government through the state, which then you sell to the tax credit investor. So that's 90% of your capital stack right there in debt and free equity. Then there's that gap, right? There's that 10%, 45 plus 45, there's that 10% gap. And this is where these deals come down to, is how can you bridge that gap? And that is part of the reason why we are called Bridgewater Real Estate Brokerage, because we're always trying to bridge that gap, bridge that water. Most people, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, do that with soft financing, that cash flow contingent subordinate debt that Brian was talking about earlier. That's money from the state, from the county or city, sometimes from private institutions like Amazon, which funded a $2.2 million grant on a project that Brian and I worked on. Brian was the developer at MHP and I was the broker. So now private institutions are getting into the game of filling that gap. But for the most part, for-profit and nonprofit developers follow that business model where they don't want to put any money in, which is beautiful, beautiful business, right? Why not? Why doesn't everyone do this, right? Well, it's risky. But the reason behind that is they do that for the developer fee, like Brian mentioned up here. The developer fee, the non-deferred part, is most of the reason why a developer will do this project. And Brian will talk more about that in his model. You'll see the developer fee, because these cash contingent loans, these subordinate debts that eat up your cash flow, there's typically little to no cash flow in these deals. This is a fee business. This is not your typical, I need a return on my investment, like a typical market rate deal, right? So this is a fee business. You're risking a lot. You're making huge guarantees to both banks and tax credit investors, and in order generally for this upfront developer fee. Then 15 years later, you can do it again if you want. But that developer fee needs to be able to last. That covers the risk for you to doing this. Then the project needs to typically not really make money, but at least service the debt and its cash flow loans so that you're not losing money throughout the course of the loan. And I've sold a couple projects where the deals didn't make sense and they were bleeding cash, and they said, "Get me out." I have seen two examples of a for-profit developer not using this model. One was they both typically use their own cash and expected well below market returns on that cash. Both cases, I am almost certain it's because it was 1031 money, which means it's just cash used to not defer to not pay capital gains, or to defer capital gains on another transaction. So those were two interesting deals. But yes, generally you're right. They both follow this model that you're probably about to show.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that. So it's basically these deals are like not, I mean, as you'd assume, they're not cash flow deals, not at all. So let's get into it. So this model is built for the functionality of capturing. There's two approaches, obviously, like any other deal, is you buy and hold and you do a substantial rehab after you apply for your LIHTC, or you just do a ground up where basically you put a contract on the property, you go through your entitlements, you go through your LIHTC application, and then you do that closing and the rest of the deal. So this is actually the numbers in this are based on a project that Adam just brought up, which is Neville. Wait, can you see my screen, by the way?
I can. Yeah, if you can make
It's the model.
if you can make the model full screen instead of all the tabs and stuff up top, that'd be better, but I can see it.
So this is based on a project that Adam was the broker on this transaction, and one of the companies that I consult with now, and that I actually used to work for, is doing this deal. So what's amazing about this deal is that it has Amazon money. Basically, we have it's a 9 and 4. The 9% captures extremely low rents because it has a higher subsidy, really. So this is where the 30%, mostly the 30%. I mean, there's some 50% in the 9% side, but most of like the higher income level units, the 80s, the 60s, those are in the other side, the 4. And what I'd like to point out is this is actually an income averaging deal. So it's not one of those 20/50 structures. So what's also important to reference is that the rents on these LIHTC deals, the maximum allowable rent, includes a utility allowance. So basically, you have your max rent that's achievable or allowable. You have to subtract that utility allowance, and that's what gets you really to your contract rent, basically. So,
hey, Brian, on that, so you have to subtract your utility allowance from the max affordable rent. Are other things like application fees, pet rent, other things that might be standard other income, do you have to subtract that, or can those be added on top?
So there's late fees, there's application fees. I've seen those in other income. However, I think there's so many covenants and so many different requirements set forth by your different lenders and your different capital sources that oftentimes they will restrict certain things in the other income category. Meaning like maybe one lender would allow you to charge application fees, but if you have Section 811 units, you might not be able to have those. So it's like there's a lot of different factors at play that you just have to be aware of, if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to know what the different requirements are and play by the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
And generally, the answer is no. They can't charge anything above it. They have to be deducted from it. Generally.
Yeah. So that's a big difference from market rate deals, that you're not getting other income on top of your base rent like you would in market rate deals.
Well, so I would say yes, but I would also point out that there is other income. In many instances, I've seen other income, but it's very, 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 very little. It's like late fees, like credit card processing fees. It's like
NSS.
Yeah, exactly. So pulling some inspiration from Acre, this is basically a mixture of a LIHTC model plus some of Acre's beautiful models. And really what you can see here is that I'm saying, okay, these units are all tax credits. However, if you so wish, you can basically select no, and then it adjusts as your applicable fraction that we just talked about recently. So let me see, what else should we talk about? So as we navigate to the summary, basically what you'll see here is that we have our permanent loan. This is sized on your operating statement. It's a large loan. Then you have your LIHTC. Then you have your soft debt, interim income, and deferred fee. But what I'd point out is that this LIHTC is actually just a 4%. It doesn't show the 9 and 4 because it just doesn't show it. Basically, how you would add that is add it to the equity line items in the sources. So let's go through. So you have your county money, your sponsor loan, which in this case was Amazon, or was the sponsor writing a loan based on the grant that they received from Amazon. And hey, Beth, by the way. Then you have your deferred fee, you have your interim income, LIHTC, and let's go ahead and look at first the LIHTC calculation, and then we'll navigate over to the cash flow, the project cash flow, so you can see the actual waterfall distribution of the monies. So this is your construction basis, which is broken down over here. This is basically like what is eligible basis, and I'll tell you, it's a hard thing to answer. This is where the accountants come in, do their cost certifications and things like that. But for means of example, the hard costs are in construction basis. The soft costs, majority, architects, etc., those are in basis. However, things such as land, which is not depreciable, is not in basis. So basically,
broker fees are not in basis, unfortunately.
Broker fees are not in basis. So as we go through, so there's a qualified census tract or DDA basis boost, aka, or all that stuff. This is so basically you have your construction basis, then you have your eligible or your basis boost. In this case, this is not in a qualified census tract. At least I don't believe it is. But you can find that online. That means that it's 100%. If it was, then it'd be 130. That gets you to your eligible basis. Then you have your applicable fraction, which I just talked about, square footage, the minimum of square footage or LIHTC units to the total. That gets you to your qualified basis, 4%. So this is where, like I said, like the 9 or the 4 makes a big difference right here at your applicable percentage. That's what gets you your LIHTC eligible, which as a result is the actual tax credit that these investors will receive per year. So then to get your actual LIHTC equity, you multiply that by 10, like I said, because it's over 10 years. Then you multiply by your credit price, which the syndicator or whomever the investor gives you. In this case, the investor was a large bank. And they calculate that based on their IRR that they want to hit. And that gets you to your actual gross LIHTC equity proceeds.
So, Brian, excuse me. So that's 90 cents. Is that what the tax credit sold for?
Yeah, it's 90 cents to each tax credit, like $1 for 90 cents, if that makes sense.
Can I ask if this was CRA money? Probably
So
is, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Why do you ask?
I'm just always curious what tax credit prices are going for.
I think tax credit prices now are much, much, much lower.
Lower?
Yeah, like bad. Like 70 cents, 80
70?
cents. Yeah. Have you seen something different?
I thought it was like 87 or 90.
I've heard now, like when we did that most recent application, they were saying that it was like 70. But I think rates were a bit higher at that time than they are right now. but it's
Yeah.
definitely a different environment. Um, so yeah. So any questions here? Are we good on this one?
Yeah, I think this is a lot of information for everybody to go through, and it'll be great to have the recording available for them to be able to run back through it. You know, as everyone can see, everyone comes from a different background and level of comfort with with underwriting and with these deals. And so, you know, what we're hoping to provide you today is a lot of the high level stuff that Brian did at the beginning, and then a lot of this under the hood stuff is, you know, what professionals like Brian and and Adam go through, you know, to provide a lot of value to affordable housing developers. Um, I have to move to another meeting, but everyone is in great hands with Brian and Adam. I think occasionally people are going to throw questions in the chat. It looks like Enrique has a question, so
I don't even
y'all
know
can
how to see
monitor that over time. And but yeah, really great to be with everyone today, and we'll connect again soon. See y'all.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. See ya.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Spencer.
Bye.
Okay, so this is the gist of the tax credit or 4% tax credit calculation. Obviously, there's no cap. So what you'll see on the 9% is that if you're far in excess of the 1 point, in this case would be 1.5 million because it's on the annual basis, you're not capturing efficiently, or your basis is too high on your 9% side because you're only going to be you're going to be maxed out. So let's just keep it high level. This is the 50% test. This basically shows your basis plus your land. And this is the total bonds, tax exempt bonds that you'll require for the project. So let's go quickly to the cash flow financing. This is the last part really that I think should be covered now. But basically what this is that you have your typical structure of the deal, but then you have your waterfall. So basically it's not as complicated as market rate waterfall. But basically these funders, which Adam said are in for profits and all other, deals, they basically will eat up the deals after debt cash flow after debt, distributable cash flow. So on this deal, the state takes 37.5% of that distributable cash flow. The county, the other funder, takes the other 37.5, aka 75% total, and the rest either goes to this investor services fee or it goes to your deferred developer fee. Now, this is how you calculate your maximum deferred developer fee, which you'll put in your sources. And it's IRS code basically that obviously you can't give a loan if it can't be paid off in 15 years. That's my understanding. So basically, and I'm not, a tax professional, but basically this is the max that you can pay off in 15 years based on this waterfall structure. So that is what you can put in your sources. So yeah, that's basically the whole complexity of the deal. As you can see, the LIHTC deals are much, and Adam, tell me if you have a differing opinion, but I've been shocked by the cost of these LIHTC developments compared to more market rate. I think there's a lot of financing fees that go to the state. There's a lot of financing fees that, as a result, or construction interest as a result of you having to meet your 50% test. And yeah, that's basically the whole deal.
Totally.
So,
I mean, because of all the extra accountants and consultants and required to do a deal like this. But also included in that is the developer fee, right? So
right.
that's a weird line item. It's also not just the cost. It's also so you can maybe subtract 18.5 from that, but still 490,000 per unit. Yeah, not cheap.
Yeah.
This is what? This is a 7-story building.
This is
5/2.
This is 5/2, 7 stories. It's not the best terrain. It basically is a sloped site.
It's got great drainage as how we sold it.
and it's right in front of train tracks. So
I remember it needed a lot of heavy engineering with stormwater management and big tanks and detention tanks underground and things like that, right? So
yeah,
that was all very expensive site work. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of I mean, this was a complex deal, but it was, I mean, it's also a very impressive deal to the fact that it got Amazon money, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's not
So
atypical. Like, this is all these deals are all very expensive. Yeah.
right. So Enrique, let me just answer these questions. What's the difference between soft debt and perm loan? So soft debt is money from a lender who basically will give you not free money, but very inexpensive money. And this is one of the um incentives, I guess, that the government or whomever, like local government or state government, provides in order to incentivize people to do these deals, or really make the deal possible. Because if you didn't have 2% or whatever cash flow contingent debt, this deal wouldn't work. Because you'd have to raise a ton of equity, and there would be basically not a good return whatsoever.
Yeah,
So
soft
yeah,
debt, subordinate debt, soft debt, are all other, other words for it. Below market loans, cash flow loans, or grants. I mean, anything that any private or public institution, either a philanthropic private institution like Amazon or a public entity like a state, city, county, wants to incentivize the development of affordable housing. It's critical. Without this, you can't do it. Got to bridge that gap.
right.
And then perm loan is just that your average same perm debt that any development gets.
Hmm. So to answer your second question, is there a minimum soft debt service payment, or is there just a pro rata share of free cash flow? So, I mean, the whole idea really behind these soft debts is that they're not must pay debt, right? I'm sure that a lender could structure it so that there is a must pay aspect, but really the whole idea is that they're a pro rata share of the free cash flow. Have you
It,
seen
it
some? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very jurisdiction dependent. Like, this deal is Montgomery County in Maryland. Each Maryland has its own sources of soft debt and its own payback rules. For every state has their own. Hope not always. Virginia is different than DC, which is different than Maryland. And then within each county and city, each of those have their own different uh, versions of soft financing as well. So it's totally dependent on where you are and what's being offered. And it's critical to know, like as a broker, I have to know where all the gap funding is, which is also this another word for soft financing, because that's where a deal can get done. If there's no gap funding, can't get done. You have to know how the structure of it and how it's paid back. Some are grants, some are cash flow loans, some are pro rata, some are it's all different.
Right. Okay. So resyndication, is that the next question? Yeah, it's a lot, 500,000. Adam, did you ever sell a deal after the 15-year period or in the 15-year period?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I've sold it all within the 15-year period. And you can't actually sell the real estate within the 15-year period. You have to sell between the 10 and the 15-year, you have to sell the GP interest. I've done that twice. Both of those deals were deals that weren't done well up front, and they were bleeding loans. So they were just, as soon as the 10-year tax credit period was over, they said, please get me out. Um, um, Resyndication is when at year 15, the operator decides not to sell and decides to redo the deal again. Then it's basically not a ground up. If MHP were to resyndicate this after year 15, it's the same similar model, but it wouldn't be a ground up. It would be an existing, called an AC rehab, where it's just a rehabilitation of an existing project. But it's all the same. It's this, you go for the same tax credits and you go for the same gap funding. And it's the same, the same perm loan, get the same tax credits, sell them, get the same, so that's very simply resyndication.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes. So Adam, there's one question that you might be able to answer interestingly. So would you recommend market rate or conventional investor go about entering the LIHTC space? What is the low-hanging fruit and lowest barrier to entry? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and it is good. We get a lot of that now. My phone's ringing now because for the simple fact that a lot of market rate deals can't get done right now, because of inflation and credit tightening. So a lot are considering this as an option. How to recommend someone going about it is you have to find a partner who knows what they're doing. At least in Virginia, Maryland, DC, which is where I am licensed and really all I know. There's a minimum threshold of 5 years of experience.
Right.
So you don't want to screw up one of these deals because you could pay recapture on all the tax credits, and then you're in a huge hole. So you want to find someone. So if you own a project and you were going to develop 250 units of market rate housing, but you can't, and you just want to consider the LIHTC option, call a broker like me or call a friend, or you want to bring on a partner. There's a lot of nonprofit partners that the nonprofit status helps in the jurisdiction. Yeah, it helps a ton locally here. It might also in California. It's often a requirement to either be a nonprofit or a minority business business. So there are companies and national nonprofits that can help you with this. They can be as low as just the face to satisfy that requirement, or they can walk you and hold your hand through it, and it'd be a wonderful teaching moment. And the amount of work that partner is required to do on your end is the amount of percentage that they can negotiate, right? So if you're bringing in a partner that's going to sign all the guarantees and on all the bonds and all the tax credits, and do all the work, then they're going to ask for a higher percentage. Or else if they're just going to be a face, just so you can have their experience and that's it, then they'll come on for a much lower percentage of the project. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I can introduce you to several. MHP is great. I don't know if they'll work in California though, but I can introduce you to several that will work out there.
We've Beth Seward on the meeting who's at MHP, so reach out to her. But anyways, so yeah, I appreciate everyone for joining. The model is not yet available. I have to talk to Alex about that. But yeah, no, I appreciate everybody very much, and I appreciate you for listening. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye.